The rental house in the mountains. This happened 2 summers ago when I was 23. My friends Dylan, Marcus, Trevor, and I decided to rent a cabin-style house in the mountains of North Carolina for a long weekend. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a chance to get away from work and school, go hiking, have a few beers, grill some food, and just hang out by the fire pit each night. Nothing fancy, no big plans, just some time outside the city to clear our heads. I'd known Dylan since high school, and we'd met Marcus and Trevor back in college. We'd all been friends for a few years, but we didn't hang out that often outside of school or work functions. So this trip was kind of a way to reconnect, a break from our usual routines. We booked the house online. It was about an hour and a half from the city, nestled in a pretty remote area near the Blue Ridge Mountains. The pictures looked nice, a rustic cabin with a big porch, surrounded by dense woods, and the kind of quiet that only comes when you're a long way from main roads. It had a fire pit out front and a few trails nearby that the owner recommended for beginner hikers. We left Friday morning, pulling our stuff together in Dylan's Jeep. The drive itself was pretty uneventful, with some good conversation and music playing. When we arrived, the house looked even better in person, older but well-maintained, with a wood stove inside and big windows overlooking the trees. The owner had left some instructions, plus a binder with maps of the area, emergency contacts, and notes about the appliances. The first night was exactly what we had hoped for. We grilled burgers outside, cracked open some beers, and sat around the fire pit telling stories and joking about work and school. It was relaxing, the kind of easy evening that makes you forget about your worries. The air was crisp, the stars brighter than I was used to seeing back in the city. The next day, we decided to do some hiking. There was a trail that looped around a small ridge near the house, and it was supposed to be a 2 to 3 hour walk. The sun was out, and the woods had that fresh summer smell, pine and damp earth. We packed snacks, filled up our water bottles, and set out mid-morning. The hike was good. Nothing too hard, mostly shaded. We stopped a couple of times to take pictures or just look out over the valleys. We joked about getting lost, of course. Nothing serious. We didn't. The trail was well marked, and we all paid attention to the signs. When we got back, we decided to rest for a bit before dinner. Dylan had brought some steaks we cooked over the fire pit, and again the evening was calm. Up to this point, the whole trip felt pretty normal. But that night, something shifted. It started with a strange noise. I was inside the cabin when I first heard it, a kind of rustling sound coming from outside. At first I thought maybe it was some wildlife, a raccoon or a deer, but then I realized the sound wasn't just normal animal noise. It was more like someone moving around slowly in the woods nearby. I mentioned it to Trevor, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. He shrugged it off, saying the area was rural, so animals were to be expected. Marcus said they didn't hear anything. Dylan was outside stacking some firewood. A little while later, after the others had gone to bed, I decided to step outside for some fresh air. The moon was up, casting a pale light on the trees. The woods looked dark and deep beyond the edge of the clearing, and that rustling noise was back. Quiet this time, but definitely there. I tried calling out, "Hello?" but there was no answer. Just silence, and then the sound stopped. I looked around, shining my phone's flashlight toward the tree line, but didn't see anything. I wanted to tell the others, but figured maybe I was just spooked or imagining things. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby. The next morning, I brought it up to Dylan over breakfast. He listened carefully and said, "We're in the middle of the woods, Caleb. Could be hikers or hunters passing by. Probably nothing." I wanted to believe him. We had plans to check out another trail that day, so we tried to keep things light. But that afternoon, while we were up on a ridge looking out over the valley, Marcus noticed something else. Footprints off the trail, too large and uneven to be any animal we've seen, heading toward the direction of the cabin. We took pictures and tracked them for a bit, but they ended near a cluster of trees and disappeared. That's when the tension really started to build. At dinner that night, we agreed to keep the doors locked when we were inside and to stay close to each other outside. Dylan joked about someone living nearby and scouting us out, but the nervousness was there in all our voices. Trevor kept checking the locks on windows, and Marcus was unusually quiet. A few hours after we'd gone to bed, We heard a loud thumping sound at the front door. Not a knock, a heavy, abrupt pounding. I sat straight up, heart racing. I whispered to Dylan to grab the baseball bat we'd brought. Marcus flicked on the porch light, but outside there was nothing, no one. We called the non-emergency police line to report the noise, explaining we were at a rental cabin and someone had been pounding on the door late at night. The dispatcher told us officers would send a patrol by, but they probably wouldn't come out immediately. The next morning we found more footprints around the cabin, this time all around the perimeter, as if someone had circled the property during the night. The ground was soft enough to see clear prints. They weren't just animal marks, they were definitely human. We talked about leaving but decided to stay, reasoning that driving out in the dark on those mountain roads wouldn't be any safer. We planned to pack up first thing Sunday morning and head back. Still, some part of me didn't want to accept what was happening. I kept thinking maybe it was just some local kids messing around or a hunter who wandered too close. That afternoon, we went back to the trail near the house to try to clear our heads. This time we carried the baseball bat and a heavier flashlight just in case. As we walked, we noticed broken branches and trampled underbrush not far from the main path. Nothing natural, definitely signs of something or someone having moved through. I tried to keep my tone casual, making conversation to distract myself, but every now and then I'd catch one of the guys glancing toward the trees, looking tense. On the way back, when we were about 10 minutes from the cabin, Dylan suddenly stopped and pointed to the side of the trail. A small backpack was lying against a bush, partially covered with leaves and dirt. We looked around, but no one else was visible. The backpack was worn and looked like it had been there for a while. No tags or anything obvious inside, just some empty water bottles and a flashlight that didn't work. It felt out of place though, like someone dropped it deliberately or maybe hid it. We debated calling the police to report what we found, but held off, still unsure what to make of it. Instead, we headed back to the house as quickly as possible. That night, the pounding at the door came back, and then a window rattled. The vibe inside the cabin was so tense we barely spoke, keeping our voices low. I lay awake most of the night, listening for any sounds outside. When morning arrived, I was the first up. I went outside to check the perimeter again. Fresh footprints were everywhere, circling the house like before, but now mixed with scrapes on the siding and one of the porch chairs knocked over. I called the police again, this time insisting they send someone out, or at least check the area soon. The dispatcher promised a squad car would be sent before noon. We spent the day glued to our phones, watching the windows and packing our bags. When the officers finally arrived in the afternoon, they were thorough, walking the grounds and checking the nearby woods. It was clear they took the situation seriously. After we showed them the footprints and the damage, 2 officers went into the woods with search dogs, while the others spoke to us inside the cabin. About an hour later, the officers returned with 2 men in handcuffs. One was a local in his late 40s, the other a younger guy, maybe mid-20s. They'd apparently been living rough in the area, following paths near the rental properties, and had been caught sneaking around the cabin late at night. Turns out they were homeless and had a history of minor thefts in the townie. The officers said these guys had been stalking cabins like ours to find places to break into or to scare people off. No one had gotten hurt this time, but the men were wanted for several break-ins recently. We were advised not to leave anything visible outside during future trips, and to report anything suspicious immediately. Driving away that afternoon, it hit me how easy it had been to let our guard down simply because we were on vacation. We thought the mountain cabin meant peace and quiet, but that unfamiliar setting, away from our normal environment, made us vulnerable. We weren't strangers to the idea that cities have dangers, but out there, in the wilderness, we felt invincible, almost like we were untouchable. That false sense of safety is what the men were counting on. Since then, I haven't looked at vacation rentals the same way. The woods haven't changed, and the mountains are still beautiful, but for me, that trip was a reminder that danger can hide anywhere, even in the places you go to escape it. And sometimes, the most unsettling thing isn't what's out there in the dark, but how quickly comfort can turn to fear in a place you thought was safe. The resort room next door. This happened when I was 21, during a spring break trip to Florida with my 2 best friends, Lena and Sophie. We'd been planning it for almost a year, saving every spare dollar after our college classes. It was our first real vacation without our parents, just the three of us, staying at a beach resort for 5 days. The resort was exactly as advertised online, or at least that's what we thought when we arrived. Palm trees swayed gently, the pool gleamed invitingly under the sun, and the beach was just a short walk away. The complex had its own restaurant, which we ate at most nights. Everything felt calm and safe. We were carefree, laughing more than usual, taking too many photos in the salty breeze. We checked into our room late afternoon and spent the first day exploring the beach and the pool. Our room was on the 3rd floor in a long, low-rise building that faced the parking lot. We could see the ocean if we leaned just right out the balcony. It was perfect, but it wasn't the ocean that caught my attention later that evening. Our room was next to one occupied by a man we'd noticed earlier at the restaurant. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, tall with dark hair and a kind of bland, generic appearance. Nothing about him seemed out of place. We exchanged quick hellos in the hall when we passed, and I remember thinking he seemed a bit reserved, or maybe shy, but not unfriendly. The room next door to ours was 308, and ours was 309. At night, I lay on my bed with the balcony door cracked open for the ocean breeze. I'd just started reading a book when I heard something. At first, it was a soft noise, a creak from the floorboard in the next room, or maybe just a settling sound. I didn't think much of it until I heard it again, quieter this time, like someone shifting weight or just moving around. I shrugged it off and tried to focus on my book. But then came another noise, this time a shuffling footstep right outside our connecting wall. I paused, heart slowing to a steady beat. I thought, maybe someone is just moving furniture? That seems unlikely at 10 p.m., but who knows? I texted Lena and Sophie in the other room, asking if they heard anything. They said no. I hoped it was nothing. The next day, things didn't feel quite normal. We spent most of the morning at the beach and then by the pool. Nothing out of order. Later that night, though, the noises started again. Footsteps, dragging sounds, occasional muffled thumps. Each time they came from the room next door, and always when we were inside, never during the day. I told the front desk the following morning, after we'd noticed a few odd things, like the man rarely leaving his room during daylight, but always coming out late at night, often for long stretches. The staff said they'd check on the guest, but when I asked if anyone had reported problems, they said no. Sophie joked we should peek through the peephole, but neither Lena nor I were comfortable with that. Instead, we agreed to be more cautious, lock the doors, keep the balcony closed after dark, and stay together. Still, the noise kept happening. One night, around 11, I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone when the sound started again. First a scrape, then a dull pounding, this time louder, like someone was dragging something heavy or banging a piece of furniture against the wall. I grabbed my phone and texted Lena to come into my room. We sat quietly, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, the lights next door went off, plunging everything into a partial darkness beneath the hallway light. A few seconds later, I heard a faint knock against our shared wall, soft but deliberate, like someone trying to get attention. I whispered, "Did you hear that?" Lena nodded, wide-eyed. We waited, but no more sounds came. After a few minutes, the hallway lights flickered and then went out completely. We were plunged into darkness, except for the faint glimmer of our phone screens. The air felt heavier, thick with tension, like something was just off, but we could never name it. We sat silently until the lights snapped back on. Then Sophie knocked on the door, saying she thought she heard something outside our door. We decided to call the front desk again. This time we asked specifically if they could send someone up to check the neighbor's room. The operator said yes, that security would come by soon. 20 minutes later, 2 uniformed security guards arrived at our door. I described the noises, the knocks, the lights going out. They said they'd handle it. We stayed up the rest of the night, too nervous to sleep, knowing someone else was next to us in that room. The guards knocked on the man's door several times, but got no answer. Then they called for backup, and a supervisor arrived. What happened next still feels surreal. Using a master keycard, they opened the door to room 308 and found the man inside, asleep on the bed. At first I felt relief, but then the officer told us what they found during their search. In the man's room, they discovered a stash of surveillance equipment, hidden cameras and microphones, placed strategically in vents and behind the curtains of our neighboring room. They had recordings from us, apparently from previous days, capturing everything we did when we were in our room. At first we were shaking, unable to process that someone had been spying on us from the room right next door the whole time. The man insisted he was just a tech enthusiast testing equipment for a company, but the officers didn't buy it. After some questioning, they found more disturbing things. Plans to break into our room once we were asleep, tools for lockpicking, and even a GPS tracker on Sophie's luggage that had been unnoticed since check-in. The police were called, and the man was arrested on multiple charges, including stalking, invasion of privacy, and attempted burglary. We spent the next day giving statements and working with hotel security as they reviewed footage from the resort cameras to understand how long he had been there and what he had been up to. The police found out that the man had been using the resort's public Wi-Fi to stalk other guests as well, checking their schedules and patterns. He'd been switching rooms, using fake IDs, and had stayed in multiple hotels under different aliases. The resort refunded us fully and arranged for alternate accommodations, but the sense of violation didn't leave any of us for a long time. What's the worst part? We were sitting just feet away the entire time, thinking the resort was a safe place, because it was busy, because there were people everywhere, staff, families, other travelers. We believed we were secure because of that. But safety isn't just about numbers or crowds. Someone dangerous can get close, really close, without anyone suspecting a thing. Next door, just beyond a thin wall, someone was watching everything we did. I still think about that, the quiet moments in our room, the blinds drawn, the lights off, and realize how vulnerable we were without even knowing it. Hotels and resorts promise comfort and security, but sometimes danger is here, real and silent, right next door. The man on the cruise ship. I'm Ethan, 24 years old, and this story is about something that happened to me on what was supposed to be a simple family cruise. A week-long trip in the Caribbean, my parents, my younger sister Haley, and me. We'd been saving for months for this vacation because none of us had ever been on a cruise before. It was meant to be a relaxing break, a last family getaway before Haley started college in the fall and I moved to a new city to start a job. Nothing fancy, just a chance to unwind and enjoy some time together. We boarded the ship on a Sunday afternoon. The sun was bright, the air warm with that salty sea smell. Our parents handled the luggage and paperwork while Haley and I wandered the decks. The cruise liner was way bigger than any building I'd been in before. Multiple restaurants, pools, theaters, shops, a gym, you name it. We joked about how people could get lost on a ship this size, but it felt friendly, almost homey. Our cabin was on the 8th deck, not too high, not too low, simple, but comfortable. Haley grabbed the window curtain and pulled it back to look at the ocean. "Can you believe we're actually out here?" she said, smiling. The waves glittered under the setting sun, and the ship's steady hum was oddly soothing. For those first few days, we stuck to the usual vacation stuff, lounging by the pool, sitting through a couple of light shows, trying new food, even a trivia night in the lounge. No one had any reason to think anything was off. The crew were helpful, the other passengers mostly older couples or families like us, all just wanting a break. That's the kind of place it was. Safe, even mundane if you gave it a chance. I remember the day things started to feel different. It was Wednesday afternoon, around day 3. Haley and I decided to check out the ship's library and game room area on deck 6. It was a quiet spot with big windows and a handful of shelves stacked with books and board games. I was flipping through a novel while Haley sat nearby playing chess against herself. That's when I first noticed him. He was sitting alone across the room at a small round table by the window. Mid-40s, nondescript jeans and a plain shirt, nothing to make him stand out except the way he watched the room. Not the kind of glance that comes from people watching or boredom. It was the kind of look that felt deliberate, like he was scanning us. At first I ignored it. People look around all the time, right? But then our eyes met. He didn't look away. Instead, he gave a faint, slow smile. Not friendly, not welcoming. More like a warning or a test. I mention this because that smile stuck with me for the entire cruise. I told Haley to keep playing chess, but I stayed alert, pretending to read while watching him out of the corner of my eye. When he stood up and moved closer, carefully, like he wasn't in a hurry, but also not wanting to be noticed, he didn't approach us though. Instead, he circled the room slowly, and then left without a word. I went to tell one of the cruise staff later that day, out of curiosity more than concern. The woman in charge of guest services listened politely, but said the ship had security cameras, and the staff kept an eye out for any suspicious behavior. She reminded me that it was normal to encounter a lot of different people from all walks of life on a cruise. Some quiet, some outgoing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this man was watching us, following strands of our route through the ship. It wasn't paranoia. It was just intuition. Over the next day or so, the man appeared a few more times in the same places, near the buffet line, at the elevators, lingering near the pool deck. Always just close enough to be noticed, but never close enough to talk. Once Haley spotted him too. She asked if he looked weird to me. I told her about the smile. It was subtle, but it built a kind of tension in the air, a slow pressure. I told my parents about the man, trying not to make a big deal out of it. They suggested we stick together more, just a precaution, and even the cruise security bumped up their patrols in the area. That night, the tension turned into something worse. I was sitting on the balcony of our cabin, trying to read and relax after dinner. Haley was inside, probably in the bathroom or getting ready for bed. Suddenly, I caught movement on the deck below. The ship's balconies all lined up, 3 decks beneath ours, and down there was the man, standing just below, staring up at our cabin. It was late, maybe 11 p.m., and the walking decks were mostly empty. The ship's soft lights cast long shadows. He didn't move for at least 10 minutes, just stood directly under our balcony, looking up. I turned to lock the sliding door, and then hurried to Haley's room to double-check she was okay. She had no idea, was brushing her teeth, laughing because she found a silly video on her phone. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I told my parents everything again, more seriously this time. My dad called cruise security directly, and for the first time, they admitted there had been a report of a suspicious man matching that description from a few passengers earlier on the cruise. Security said they would keep an eye out and suggested that we remain vigilant, report anything immediately, and avoid isolation. By midweek, the man's presence became more than just a dull anxiety. One afternoon, we were by the pool when I saw him watching from the shaded seating area across the deck. I felt my skin crawl. It was different now. No longer just watching us. This was staking out, waiting. I told my parents, and we decided not to go back to the pool alone for a while. That night, the worst happened. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a noise outside our cabin door. It was faint but unmistakable, a soft scraping, like a fingernail dragging along metal or wood. The hallways were deserted, and the night crew had been quiet for hours. I got up, heart pounding, and looked through the peephole. Outside, no one, no shadows. I figured maybe it was the wind or the ship settling. I locked the door twice and went back to bed, but couldn't shake the fast beating of my heart. The feeling of vulnerability was thick. That morning, the ship's public announcement system suddenly came on. A calm but firm voice requested all passengers check their doors and report any unusual activity immediately. That was the first official warning we got. Security asked everyone to be extra cautious and to contact the bridge if anything felt off. When my dad went to the guest services desk, the officers confirmed that they had been monitoring the man for days after several complaints and were finally looking for him to question about potential stalking behavior. A few hours later, the man was spotted again near one of the ship's service stairwells. Security stopped him before he could get into restricted areas. When questioned, he didn't say much, but admitted to being on the ship for a while. They found in his luggage some tools and several ship keycards that didn't belong to him. That's when they arrested him. It turned out he was not a passenger at all, but a crew member who had been hiding somewhere on the ship, avoiding detection. The police and security officers handed us reassurances, but honestly, the feeling of relief didn't fully settle in that day. For the rest of the cruise, we stayed close together, never alone, and the ship felt smaller and less like a vacation paradise and more like a place we were stuck. Coming home, even though we were safe, I realized something disturbing. No matter where you go, and no matter how careful you think you are, there's always a chance you can feel trapped in a place you thought you could leave whenever you wanted. On a cruise ship, it's obvious there's no escaping without a ticket back, but that feeling stuck, that knowing someone was watching us, that someone found ways to hide in plain sight, made me understand just how fragile a sense of security can be. It wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was just a man who shouldn't have been there, and what he could do if he chose to. That vacation we all expected to be relaxing ended up showing me how quickly the familiar can turn into a threat, and how easily a place that's supposed to be your sanctuary can feel like a cage. The tour guide. I never thought I'd find myself in a situation where I felt totally powerless, standing in a quiet Italian town I barely knew with a stranger I thought I could trust. But that's exactly what happened during a trip to Italy a few years ago. My first real trip abroad without my parents. My name's Isabella. I was 22 at the time, and the person I was traveling with was my older cousin, Natalie. Natalie is 25, confident, always traveled a bit more than me, so going with her made me feel safe. We'd spent months planning a 2-week itinerary through Italy, Rome, Florence, Venice, and some smaller spots we'd researched to avoid crowds and see some authentic, less touristy parts. Most of the trip went smoothly, mostly a blur of cobblestone streets, gelato, and churches older than anything I'd ever seen. But about halfway through, we stopped in this coastal town that hardly any tourists seemed to visit, somewhere between Cinque Terre and Pisa. It was small, quiet, the air salty and cool. We thought it would be a nice, relaxing break before the more bustling cities. One afternoon, we wandered around looking for a cafe and sat down at a small outdoor place near the harbor. While we were there, a man approached us. He wore a plain beige jacket and had a small badge clipped near his lapel. He introduced himself as Carlo, a local tour guide who specialized in historical and nature tours around the area. Carlo had a calm voice, and he spoke English well, enough to make us comfortable. His manner was friendly but professional, and because we wanted to do some hiking and explore nearby villages more off the beaten path, hearing about local tours from a real local seemed like a good idea. He told us about a private tour that would take us through some coastal ruins and isolated cliff trails, places you couldn't easily access alone. The price sounded reasonable, and he promised the group would be just us and maybe one other couple. Natalie and I felt a little thrill at seeing parts of Italy most tourists never get to, so we agreed to book the tour for the next day. The next morning, we met Carlo near the small harbor. He was waiting by an old boat, a compact passenger motorboat painted white and blue. Even though the sun was out, the wind was brisk. Carlo handed us life jackets and explained the safety rules. The boat ride itself was stunning, jagged cliffs and tiny sea caves flickering in and out of sight. I remember feeling relaxed, like this was exactly the kind of authentic experience we'd hoped for. Once we reached shore at a small rocky beach, Carlo led us up a narrow dirt path. The trail was steep, but nothing too challenging. He chatted casually about local history, the old fishing villages, nearby ruins from the Middle Ages. Natalie and I stuck close behind him, enjoying the quiet, the sea breeze, the wildflowers lacing the path. We followed him deeper into the cliffs, passing small caves and overlooking the endless blue sea. What started as a charming adventure began to quietly shift after about an hour. Because the trail wasn't marked and was pretty isolated, I glanced down at my phone to check the time and to see if I had cell service. No signal. That wasn't unusual in places like this, but it made me a little uneasy. I tried to push the feeling aside. I told myself we were with Carlo. He knew what he was doing. 2 things stuck out that day. One was how Carlo insisted we stay close, almost too close. He kept looking over his shoulder, scanning behind us. I noticed he grew quiet when I tried to ask more questions about the ruins. At first I thought maybe it was a language barrier or shyness. The second thing was, at one point, we reached a fork in the trail. Carlo stopped, pulled out a crumpled piece of folded paper, and looked around. Then he said something like this way first." He pointed left, a steeper, narrower path heading uphill. This made me pause because based on what he'd said the day before, most tourists took the easier right path first to reach the main ruins. I told him, "Actually, I think the right path is where you said the ruins are." He shrugged, a little defensively. No, no. This is better view, less people. Natalie and I exchanged a glance but kept going. There weren't many options, so we followed. The hill grew steep and uneven, and a faint mist began to rise from the sea below. I noticed Natalie's steps getting slower, a little cautious. It was during this climb that I started to truly feel nervous. The path became rockier, and the wind picked up sharply. Carlo didn't say much. Suddenly, he stopped and said, "We must rest here." There was no bench or real place to sit, just a narrow ledge with a small, collapsed stone wall behind it. I looked around. Nothing especially scenic, no ruins in sight. Natalie and I sat down on the stones. Carlo made some soft noises that I didn't understand. Then he pulled out a small black bag from his jacket pocket. I kept my phone in my hand, still no signal. I told myself, stay calm. We were only miles from the town. Someone would notice if we were gone. Yet even as I thought that, I realized the trail was almost deserted. Carlo asked us some questions then, about where we were staying, what else we had planned. A part of me wanted to relax, to try to see him as just a guide doing his job. But my gut was twisting, and I realized my voice was shaking slightly when I answered him. Natalie noticed it too, and reached out to squeeze my arm gently. Suddenly, Carlo's phone rang. He answered quickly and spoke in hurried, sharp Italian. I couldn't understand the words, but I caught the tense tone. Then he looked at me, his friendly mask seeming to slip for a moment. His words in English were suddenly clipped. "We should go back now. Bad weather coming." I looked up. The sun had disappeared behind clouds quickly, faster than anything I expected. We stood and followed him back down the trail. On the return path, Carlo's demeanor was different. Hesitant, almost nervous. Something about his movements felt off. He was tight-lipped, scanning constantly, as if expecting someone or something. When we neared the beach where the boat was docked, I spotted a small white police car parked near the pier. 2 officers stepped out and called to us. Carlo looked startled, pale. The officers asked to speak with him privately. Natalie and I waited on the beach, frozen. Later, the police came over to us. They said Carlo had been under investigation for some time. Apparently, he'd been using fake tour credentials to lure tourists off the beaten path and rob them, or worse, isolate them in areas where no one else was around. There were reports from hikers and backpackers of missing phones, wallets, even claims of assault. We were extremely lucky. The place we were led to had cell reception, and I'd managed to send a quick message before we started the tour, which alerted the police to our itinerary. They had been monitoring and finally caught him that day. Natalie and I stayed in town a few more days before resuming our trip. The incident left me feeling shaken in ways I didn't expect from a holiday. It wasn't just the fear of that moment. It was thinking back to how normal everything seemed at first. Carlo had looked like just another professional, someone official and trustworthy. His badge, the way he spoke, the friendly smile, they all made me think, of course, he's someone legit. But the truth was far more complicated. In an unfamiliar place, a friendly face can be a mask. It became clear how dangerous it is to trust someone solely because they seem official or knowledgeable. Travel feels exciting because of the newness, the adventure, but that comes with a vulnerability you don't often acknowledge, especially when you're young and trusting. I'd always heard warnings about scams or thieves, but I thought they were exaggerations, distant stories. Now I know better. And that's why I'm sharing this story calmly, not to scare, but to remind anyone listening that sometimes the biggest danger is someone who seems safe at first glance. Sometimes a tour guide, the person who's supposed to show you the wonders of a new place, is the one who could hurt you the most. Be cautious. Trust actions, not appearances. Because in a strange town, a badge doesn't guarantee safety.